So you've definitely been in a restaurant bathroom, right? And you see a sign that looks like this: employees must wash hands before returning to work. And you're thinking, oh my God, there are so many things wrong with this sign. First of all, do they have to be reminded? Ouch. But second of all, there's something else wrong here, something that has to do with the apostrophe. So let's get into our rules today, and then we'll come back and talk about what's wrong with the sign. Let's get started, and we'll talk about the top skills that you need to tackle the punctuation questions you'll see on the ACT. We're going to talk about commas, and we're going to talk about apostrophes, because these make up the overwhelming bulk of punctuation questions you'll see. Let's look at commas first. Comma rule number 1. You're going to want to use commas for lists or for small pause or shift in a sentence. Now, you probably know this already. We're just going to do a quick review. So here we go. Sarah, his girlfriend of 3 years, walked out on him after his Facebook addiction became too difficult to handle. As I read it, I paused a little bit, right? You just take a breath there. Sarah, his girlfriend of 3 years, walked out on him. That's kind of a spot where you would put a comma. This is the other example. I bought eggs, cheese, bread, and pretzels in the store. You know this. You stick in a comma for lists. By the way, don't worry about if there should be a comma before and on a list. The ACT never tests that because actually there's disagreement about that between grammar experts. Here's comma rule number 2. Use commas to separate a non-essential word, phrase, or clause. Now, what do I mean by non-essential? Back to Sarah, the girlfriend that walked out because of the Facebook addiction. So we have Sarah, his girlfriend of 3 years, walked out on him after his Facebook addiction became too difficult to handle. A non-essential phrase means you can take the whole chunk out and the sentence still works as a sentence and it still has meaning. Here, you could just say, Sarah walked out on him after his Facebook addiction became too difficult to handle. It's a nice piece of information to have that she was his girlfriend for 3 years, but not necessary. Next one, that day, which happens to be my birthday, is the only day that I'm available to meet. Now, I care that it's my birthday. Do you care that it's my birthday? Probably not. And you can pull that out, and that sentence will still make perfect sense. So that's not essential to the meaning of the sentence. So on the ACT, when you see some sort of phrase underlined and you've got commas on both sides, ask yourself, should they be there? And they should be there if it's not essential. If you can take it out and the sentence will still make sense. Now here's our next rule. Use a comma before a fanboys conjunction. You probably remember learning this in school. Fanboys stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Now these are connecting words, and they'll connect two sentence chunks that actually could be sentences on their own. Let's look at this one. The game was over, but my friend refused to leave before getting LeBron's autograph. Now, really? The game was over? That's a sentence. My friend refused to leave before getting LeBron's autograph? That's a sentence too. So anytime you have one of these words, the fanboys words, connecting two clauses that actually could be sentences alone, you always need a comma before. And this, by the way, you guys, is the only time on the ACT you will ever have a comma before and. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your ACT English section. Okay, next comma rule. When in doubt, take it out. On the ACT, it is overwhelmingly more common to pull a comma out or to not insert one at all on a punctuation question than to ever put it in. So it should be really hard for you to put a comma in. You're going to always want to just take them out or not put them in at all. Here, although, Jim was tired, he finished the paper by the 6 a.m. deadline. And then you think to yourself, do you need the comma? Always lean towards pulling it out. Here, we've got that option. Although Jim was tired, in D, he finished the paper by the 6 a.m. deadline. Right? There's no need to pause there. Although Jim was tired, you've got commas on both sides. Another question you can ask yourself, should there be commas on both sides? Is it an essential phrase, like we talked about before, right? Because two commas will separate a non-essential phrase. Well, that's pretty essential. That's the point. Even though he was tired, he finished the paper by the 6 a.m. deadline. You couldn't take the whole chunk out. It would just say, although he finished the paper by the 6 a.m. deadline. And then you'd be like, so What happened next, Devora? Tell me more. So it's essential. That's the other way you know that that comma needs to come out. There shouldn't be a comma on both sides, and in fact, there shouldn't be a comma there at all. Let's talk about apostrophes. Now, there are a lot of evils in the world today. One very minor one, but one that bothers me a lot, apostrophe abuse. I see students and just people in general, they put apostrophes almost in front of anything with an S. Never do this, ever. There are only 2 times you're going to care about apostrophes, especially on the ACT. And let's look at those 2 rules that you need to know. First, possessives, right? And you know this. If something belongs to somebody or something, it gets an apostrophe. And possessives always get an apostrophe S unless that word is a plural word ending in S. Let me show you what I mean. Mr. Jones's iPod. So Mr. Jones is a singular person. He gets an apostrophe S. Students sometimes have a problem with this because they look at it and they say S apostrophe S. I thought that wasn't allowed. It is, but only if that subject is singular. So Mr. Jones, one person, apostrophe S. Perfect. Next, Sam's DVD. This you know, you got a subject, apostrophe S, singular, perfect. Here, plural ending in S. And this is the case where you have S and just an apostrophe. The boys' jerseys. And that's when you would use apostrophes for possessives. All right, let's talk about our next rule. Remember to think about contractions. And contractions are when you've got 2 words smushed together and the apostrophe shows that. It's is always it is or it has. And by the way, that's the only time it's has an apostrophe. It's will never have an apostrophe for a possessive. So when you see it's, think to yourself, it is or it has. Like it's been fun, it has been fun. Another contraction, your, for example, is you are. And make sure you know that's different than your, something belonging to you. Their, with an apostrophe, is they are, right? We've got 2 words smushed together. Don't mistake that for their, something belonging to them. Let's look at an example ACT apostrophe question. The rabbit squirrel had foam pouring out of its mouth. Now you see it's with an apostrophe. And remember we talked about how it's is never possessive. It's is always it is or it has. So even though the mouth belonged to the squirrel, it's is not going to have an apostrophe here. So it's would be the correct answer here. It's without an apostrophe. All right, so those are the top comma and apostrophe rules that you need for the ACT. We went over the top punctuation skills that you need on the ACT. Next, we're going to talk about the top grammar rules that you need to know. First, we're going to talk about subject-verb agreement. Next, we're going to talk about pronoun-noun agreement. Subject-verb agreement, and you're probably getting a little nervous, it sounds a little scary. Let's talk about what it is. Anytime you see a verb underlined, match it to its subject. Subject-verb agreement means that whenever you have a verb, it has to match the subject it's talking about. Here, many high-ranking colleges are on the East Coast. Are is a verb, and by the way, as an aside, any kind of version of to be in the English language, being, is, are, we Americans think that just being is an action. So when you see is or are underlined, that's a verb, just like running, walking, dancing, those kind of verbs. So here we've got are, a verb underlined, and the subject needs to match. So what are? Well, colleges are. Perfect. So we've got a plural subject, plural verb. Nice. Next one. The collection of prom dresses is going to be displayed at the Mall of America tomorrow. This is a really tricky one. Anytime you see a word like collection, group, committee, class, even an institution of some sort like the IRS, the bank, it's singular. So even though it's a collection of dresses and dresses are plural, make sure you match that verb that's underlined back to the proper subject. It's not the prom dresses that are going to be displayed, it's the collection of dresses. So this works. The collection is going to be displayed at Mall of America. So let's look at our second rule for subject-verb agreement. In most cases on the ACT, the subject and verb are separated. This is really tricky. So you're going to have a verb. You're going to pick it up right away. You're going to say, oh, it's underlined. It's a verb. They're going to ask me about this. Let me make sure it's matching to the right subject. but make sure you trace far back in that sentence at times to find out where that subject is. Here's some examples. Matt, along with his friends, is going to a Super Bowl party. How tricky is that? You would think friends are going. This should be are, but it's not. Trace it back. It's Matt, along with his friends, is going to the Super Bowl party. Here's another example. This, by the way, huge pet peeve of mine. I see this in medical buildings all the time, and I'm thinking, you guys should really know better. The use of cellular phones and pagers is prohibited in this building. I always see the use of the cell phones and pagers are prohibited. Actually, use, this is correct, use should be is. So the use of cellular phones and pagers is prohibited in the building. If you wanted to just say cellular phones and pages are prohibited, that's fine. But it's not the cellular phones and pagers, it's the use of them. And use is singular, so use goes to is. The use of cellular phones and pagers is prohibited in the building. Okay. Next, sometimes the subject and verb are close together. This is more rare on the ACT. Usually you're gonna have to search for the subject. Once in a while, they're nice to you, they'll show up right next to each other. Like here. Many high-ranking colleges are on the East Coast. Colleges are on the East Coast. Perfect. Okay. The new football stadium rises over the lake. One stadium rises. So your subject matches your verb, and they're right next to each other. Let's look at an example so we can put all these rules together. High above the Hudson River rises the gleaming skyscrapers. This is a tricky one. Think about it for a second. So it sounds good. The Hudson River rises, right? The river rises. But what's rising here? So we've got a verb underline. We really need to make sure that it matches the right subject. So it's not the river rising, it's the skyscrapers rising, right? So skyscrapers are plural, and two skyscrapers rise. Does that make sense? So we need to change this. So we shop through our answer choices, and here we go. High above the Hudson River rise the gleaming skyscrapers. Let's go on to our next rule that we need for our grammar questions. Pronoun-noun agreement. And pronouns, by the way, are words that really take the place of nouns. You know, things like their, hers, his, she, it. Here's an example. Doug went dumpster diving in an attempt to find his lost retainer. So his is a pronoun because it's taking the place of Doug. Without pronouns, we would sound really redundant. We would say things like, Doug went dumpster diving in an attempt to find Doug's lost retainer. So pronouns are words that just take the place of nouns, so life doesn't get boring. And here, his, that's a pronoun, matches up with Doug. Doug is a him, a guy, his lost retainer. Perfect. So on the ACT, when you see a pronoun underlined, make sure it's matching up to the right noun. Pronoun-noun agreement, rule number 2. Remember that someone, everyone, or everybody need a singular pronoun. Now this is something that you hear all the time in life, and we all just say things like this, and they're incorrect. Someone lost their shoe on senior ditch day. You probably say this, right? I know I do. But when you see a word like someone, or everyone, or everybody, that's a singular word, even though it's talking about a collective group of people. Same with those sneaky words I talked about earlier, things like collection, committee, group, all singular, because it's one group of people. So someone would need his or her, because it needs a singular pronoun to match up with the noun. So instead of someone lost their shoe on senior ditch day, it should be someone lost his or her shoe on senior ditch day. Let's look at an example ACT question. The IRS finally revamped their website. And again, this is an error we all make. But the IRS, even though we think of it as, lots of people, it's singular. It's one institution. So the IRS needs a singular pronoun, not a plural one. And a good pronoun that's singular for a thing would be its, right? But back to apostrophes, we have two choices for its. Should its have an apostrophe or not? Think about it for a second. No, right? Because its never gets an apostrophe for possessive. It only gets an apostrophe if it is or it has a contraction. And that's not the case here. So the right answer would be B. The IRS finally revamped its website. We talked about the top punctuation and grammar rules that you need on the ACT. Now, let's talk about the top sentence structure rules you need for ACT success. Remember, as I go over them, that there are 18 sentence structure questions out of 75 English. So these are really, really important. We're going to talk about run-ons and sentence fragments, misplaced modifiers, and parallelism. These are the 3 top concepts tested on the sentence structure questions. First, run-ons and sentence fragments. I didn't go to the concert, period. Even though I was impressed with his videos on YouTube, these most students really have an intuitive feel for. You kind of know, this should be a complete sentence. I should rework this. How about a run-on? Keep an eye out for really, really long sentences that feel like they should just end somewhere sooner than where they do end. Even though I was impressed with his videos on YouTube, I didn't go to the concert since I just couldn't afford the tickets after splurging on a Hummer limousine for prom night. A lot of words, you could stop that somewhere in the middle and make that into 2 sentences. So on the ACT, keep a close eye out for run-ons and for sentence fragments. Parallelism, that's our next topic. Faulty parallelism is when different grammatical forms are used to express equal ideas. What do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. Julie enjoys cheerleading, swimming, and to play tackle football. It doesn't sound amazing, right? Why? Well, because cheerleading and swimming are gerunds, meaning you just need to know words that end in ing. So once you're expressing an idea with a bunch of ing words, make sure they're all ing words. A better way to say this would be, Julie enjoys cheerleading, swimming, and playing tackle football. So that's parallelism, making sure all the ways that you express an idea line up, especially in a list. Misplaced modifiers is our next skill we need to review. If there's a word or phrase describing something, make sure it's close enough to the word that it needs to modify. So a modifier just means a chunk of words that is describing something about another word or maybe a person. Here's an example. Josh packed his favorite jeans in his duffel bag, which he planned to wear during spring break. Something's wrong with this sentence, right? It almost sounds like he's going to wear his duffel bag during spring break. So you would need to rework this sentence a little bit. Maybe something like, Josh packed his favorite jeans, which he planned to wear during spring break, in his duffel bag. So the modifier here is, which he planned to wear on spring break. It's describing what's going to happen, and it needs to be next to his jeans, not next to his duffel bag. So keep an eye out for misplaced modifiers. Let's look at an example of a real ACT question. Sizzling on the grill, Dana smelled the Copper River salmon. She started to make the salad that would be served along with the fish. Now, since this example is actually showing up with a little bit of context, I'm going to first go through the 3 questions we talked about in our English strategy episode. So you're going to ask yourself, does it belong here, right? And we know it does because, after the salmon, she's making a salad. That sounds good. It sounds like it should be there. And are there any grammatical errors? Not so much. And we already know it's a sense question. It's about modifiers. It almost sounds like Dana's on the grill. Really creepy. It should sound like the salmon's on the grill. So if you look, we're going to find the answer choice that moves the modifier to the right spot. The sizzling on the grill, that modifying phrase, should be closer to the salmon and really not close to Dana. So which of these sounds best? Well, we could omit it, but we know we talked about it belongs here. We should keep it. How about sizzling on the grill, period. Dana smelled the Copper River salmon. Not great. It was fine as one sentence, right? Grammatically, it worked. How about sizzling on the grill, Dana's smelling the Copper River salmon. Ouch. And it almost does more to the original than we really wanted. How about this? Dana smelled the Copper River salmon sizzling on the grill. Perfect. The sizzling on the grill right next to the salmon. And now we know, thankfully, it's the salmon on the grill, not Dana. Now we've done a review of the top sentence structure rules you need for the ACT. Let's wrap this up. In this episode, we talked about punctuation and focused on apostrophes and commas, since those show up the most. We talked about grammar and talked about things like subject-verb agreement and pronoun-noun agreement, and we looked at some examples. Last, we talked about sentence structure and talked about fragments, run-ons, parallelism, and misplaced modifiers. So now let's talk about our sign. Employees must wash hands before returning to work. We know something's iffy about that apostrophe. Well, we'll ask ourselves, is hands possessive? Is anything belonging to the hands? No. So we don't need an apostrophe for that reason. Is it a contraction? Remember, two words smushing together? Should it be hand is and the apostrophe is signaling that? No, not at all. So we can cross off our apostrophe. All right, so you might still have to worry about hygiene in these bathrooms, but at least we won't have to worry about grammar.